Hey everybody, my name is Lukk, and I'm the associate head coach at Thomas College in Waterville, Maine, and this is Sisyphus Boulder running the substitution box. Thanks to Firesidelacrosse for supplying the platform for this presentation. To preface, with fall ball in the rearview mirror, I really look at this as an opportunity to create a letter to my younger self. Running the substitution box can be overlooked, and especially the role of the box coach. You might be wearing a lot of hats, working with the face-off guys, doing equipment, cutting film, working with the goalies, and everything else that goes into being an assistant coach. When I first started, I wish I would have been more versed into how to run the box. Throughout the course of this presentation, we will touch on a number of points, including roles and responsibilities of the box coach, my philosophy, protocol for running the box, as well as getting into some X's and O's. Hopefully, this is a helpful guide to all of you that are transitioning to new roles or stepping into the coaching profession for the first time. With that being said, I think it's absolutely paramount that you know and accept your role as a box coach. Typically, this can fall to the new guy or low man on the totem pole, but I think it needs to be said that the box coach is absolutely vital to the success of your team. If you do find yourself in that position, you need to take pride in it, invest in it, and get good at it. Have to versus get to. The idea that your head coach is making you do this versus the attitude that you get to run the box. While you might not be the coach drawing up the play coming out of a timeout with 15 seconds left in the conference championship game, you sure can make sure that all of your subs are on at the correct time. We're not giving up goals in transition, and our substitutions are clean, effective, and timely. Something that I learned throughout my time is the idea of counting forward. To put it in layman's terms, how many can we have on offense? How many can we have on defense? Offensively, the joke is that all you have to do is count to 6. It's that simple. However, this has a tendency to get tricky, especially when we get going up and down, fail clears, as well as everything else that can happen during the course of any given game. Always remember, we just need to count to 6. Conversely, we have 7 on defense, including the goaltender, with 4 big sticks on the field at any given time, not 5. Famous last words. If anybody's going to screw up the box, let it be me. We'll certainly get into that rationale as well as the inner workings of that, but I do think at the end of the day, as a coach, we preach accountability, and it's important to be able to have an open and honest dialogue when there is a substitution error. While these errors do reflect poorly on the box coach, you've got to be able to turn to your head coach and say, yeah, I put 7 on versus I have no idea what's going on. Getting into the philosophical piece, I'm the son of a football coach, so I spent a lot of time at football practice as well as just watching football with my dad. Throughout those anecdotal experiences, the NFL lineman analogy really sticks with me. It breaks down to the notion that if nobody's talking about you as the box coach or the box in general, it's been a great day. Something that's really important, and an idea which I certainly can't stress enough, is to never watch the game. I always tell our players to be where their feet are, and especially as a coach, you need to be present, not worrying about the past rep, good or bad. In the same breath, it's essential that you understand that running the box is an absolutely thankless position. You will make mistakes. Something that I learned from my first college experience is that you need to go palms down, make new mistakes, and just do the next right thing. I do think it is really important for everyone, especially younger coaches, to have the mindset of being your own harshest critic while simultaneously also being your own biggest advocate. Do the next right thing and make sure that we're making new mistakes. Something else that's also helped me is a physical act, like snapping a wristband or lightly tapping the back of my heel with my opposite foot to remind myself to be present and stay grounded. Obviously, this doesn't have to be something exceedingly demonstrative. However, I think if you're able to pick up on those cues, you'll be able to remind yourself when you're anxious or when there's a lot going on to just be there in the moment, be present, and not get caught up watching the game. Within this ideology, it's also important to be cognizant of your body language. To that point, something I started doing later on in my career is that I will always hold a whiteboard or a substitution game sheet so that my arms are never crossed or behind my back or anything like that. Not to delve too much into it, but I think it is important how you present yourself as well as being conscious of your body language. In order to keep a clean box, you need to be in control and direct your players with poise. In that same vein is essentially that you never let anyone else, whether it be coaches or players, to substitute players on and off the field. That idea of being accountable is really important. Additionally, with conduct fouls and everything else that goes into running the box, something you need to be cognizant of is keeping players that aren't immediately subbing out of the box area, again, to avoid conduct fouls, and also realizing that the players that are exiting the field have the right of way. The officials will do a great job of reminding you of that, but again, this is something you don't want to have anything tic-tac go against you, especially in those crucial moments. When we talk about the protocol of how to run the box, what's worked for me in the past is utilizing a player's name or number followed by a command and then the urgency of the command. As you progress with your substitution patterns, you can certainly add hand signals in there as a way to communicate across the field. There certainly will be situations, whether it's following a turnover or during a clear, where you're going to be 50 yards away and you've got to be able to effectively communicate to your players what exactly you need them to do. With that being said, I think precise communication, making sure that being crystal clear, utilizing verbiage such as step on sides, step on the offensive end. In that same breath, something that can really snake bite a lot of younger coaches, especially, is that overused phrase of "you're good." Hey, coach, am I good? Yeah, you're good. What exactly does that mean? Can I go on sides? If I go on sides, are we only going to have 5 guys on the offensive end? If I step on the offensive end, are we going to have 7 guys and it's going to be a turnover? Being cognizant of the idea that you're going through your subs, make sure that you're being exceedingly deliberate with what you say. Players these days do take things exceedingly literal, so you have to be absolutely crystal clear with what you're saying, not giving direction that can be understood, but rather giving direction that cannot be misunderstood. Within this, it's important to call specific names, not positions, something I've definitely been guilty of in the past. For instance, following a turnover on offense at the top of the box and you're scrambling, or your team generates a turnover defensively and you're pushing with the first 3 over the midfield line, there's a tendency to say, I need a midi, as opposed to, Johnny, be ready here. Or if you have specific lineups set up, white line is up next. It also places an onus on the players to have accountability with what they're doing. Something that's also helped me is delegating some responsibility to specific players, having a specific player organize their line. So, for instance, you could say, white line is up, Smith, organize your line here. I think it really allows players to have some skin in the game and put themselves in a position where they're accountable. They've got their line organized, so all you have to do is turn around and say, hey, white line is up, and Smith's already got it locked in. Another facet that I learned really quickly and has been reinforced throughout the years is that we always want to think defensive following a whistle or stoppage of play. I think the best way to rationalize this is anytime a whistle occurs, errant or not, just assume it's going against us, and this will allow us to get our full defensive complement on the field. As an assistant coach, especially one who's tasked with running the box, manufacturing reps can be a challenge. Whether it's at the Division I level or the high school level where I got my start, there's just not enough time in the day, especially for coaches that are learning substitution patterns or just getting comfortable running the box. So the question becomes, how else can we get reps in? At one of my past stops, we were fortunate enough to be able to play 1 game per week, which gave us a lot of time to work on every conceivable metric of the game, particularly as it pertained to lacrosse IQ. One piece of drill work that was exceedingly stress-inducing for me, but also worth its weight in gold, was sudden change. We would rehearse every situation. Face-off win to sub, face-off loss to a sub, face-off win back to a clear, followed by an offsides, man-up phase, man-down phase, man-down phase to a clear to an offsides, etc. As you can imagine, you get the opportunity to get reps of every situation possible. There were certainly some moments where I made mistakes in practice. Fortunately for me, I was provided with the opportunity to fail and would often hear, maybe we'll get it next week, Pape. In the Division III world, where time is at even more of a premium, I think it is absolutely paramount to create reps for yourself. While everyone learns differently, something for me that really helped is that I would draw our substitution patterns out on a piece of paper or on a whiteboard. Especially now with everything that's available online, you can also make annotated drawings, which can be helpful. Film review is another area that is absolutely crucial. I think it's important to be critical of yourself as well as the substitutions, figuring out if this was an efficient sub. And when we get into kind of the minutia of that, there's definitely certain things that really irk coaches. And something that comes to mind is any time in which a player is subbing off the field and running parallel to the midfield line instead of stepping over the midfield line. A great coach once told me, if you ever find yourself running parallel to the midfield line, just to step over. With that, I do think everything in life breaks down to attitude and effort, especially when we talk about substitution. It's fantastic when we go from defense to offense. We run our unsettled offense, nothing's there. In the time between running the break and getting into a settled set, are we sprinting off the field or are we jogging? Taking that momentary time in between unsettled and settled offenses to rest, especially in the era of the shot clock, can be the difference between playing offense with 60 seconds as opposed to 57 seconds, which can be make or break. Open and honest dialogue with your staff as well as player feedback is another dimension that warrants serious thought and consideration. That staff dynamic is going to be crucial in knowing how the substitution game has been working as well as how it's going to work week by week. Did we sub too early? Did we sub too late? A lot of times we're trying to be efficient and get guys on and off the field, but with that being said, another factor to consider is, did we miss an opportunity to get an opponent stuck defensively? If we have the opposition's number one offensive player who just played offense and then had to sprint in the hole, are we letting him off the hook by subbing a defensive midfielder when maybe we could have stayed and played 5v5 or gotten him involved in the pick game? Last but not least, something that has also really benefited me is having some skin in the game for our players. Something that I've done at multiple stops is drill work where, as coaches, we basically swallow the whistle for a 5 to 10 minute period and allow the players to substitute on their own, whether it's game to one or other things like that. So you can have your players run the box or on their own directing substitutions while coaches can ref and just let the boys play. This is awesome for us as coaches because it gives you an opportunity to see subs from a different angle or pick up on cues that you might not otherwise have been keen to. I think that it really does open up another perspective and allows you to see outside of film work and all the stuff that you're doing on your own. What do our substitution patterns look like? Where are these guys getting stuck or having hangups? The player feedback piece is also valuable. Obviously, take what they say with a grain of salt, but I've been really fortunate to be in some really good programs, some of which were very senior laden. On one occasion, one of our senior captains came up and asked me if we were changing the substitution pattern this year because we were only subbing one guy at a time, and I realized that was on me. That was something that I could have done better in those particular situations. We could have afforded to sub one player through the midfield as well as another through the box and just been overall more efficient with what we were doing. When we talk about game day, especially that first whistle, there's a few orders of operations and things we need to be cognizant of. First and foremost, following a face-off win or loss, and again, it's not necessarily what you teach, it's what you emphasize, you need to have conversations with both your box side attackmen as well as your box side defensemen, reminding them that they need to make their way to the box with purpose and intent. The one caveat with this is that defensemen can afford to be slower to come off the field. When we think about all the things that can happen, say for instance, we win a face-off, your face-off man's running down the field and nobody slides to him, he shoots, he hits a pipe, and then all of a sudden, if we're wrapped up in trying to be efficient and getting that box side close defenseman off the field, we might be giving up a numbers advantage on the back end. So I think with that, there's certainly that lacrosse IQ piece, and that's definitely something to be cognizant of. Having this conversation with those box side players is important, but at the end of the day, just being able to put them in a position to read the play and be a lacrosse player is paramount. Expectations and non-negotiables. The substitution is not complete until the player who's subbing is all the way off the field, and 99% of the time what that's going to look like is a full sprint. Something that I've definitely put my hand on the stove and learned the hard way, but again, in the vein of trying to be as efficient as we can, we never, under any circumstance, sub two close defensemen at a time, which would leave only one defenseman on our defensive end at any given time for all the reasons I listed above. As you're going through practice in those simulated full field situations as well, if you are fortunate enough to be able to dedicate some time to just ride and clear, as well as going through the full field subs and stuff like that, I think it's really important to remind players that if they are ever running parallel to the midfield line while subbing, to just get over the midfield line. The sooner they do that, the sooner it allows us to get someone else on the field and puts us in a position to be successful. Like I alluded to earlier, we can be late offensively, but we can never be late subbing defensively. Generally speaking, when everything goes according to plan, we want to give our offense at least 60 seconds to work with. Ideally, there's some ways to kind of trim off a second or two here or there, but at the end of the day, you've got to be present. You've got to understand the flow of the game while also simultaneously not watching the game and putting yourself in a position to be successful, which in turn provides both sides of the ball ample opportunity to make the biggest impact on the field that they can. These first series of clips will detail first whistle situations or situations just following a face-off. In this first clip, we have Penn State and Navy versus Duke in white. With the Skycam footage, I think that this gives a great opportunity to just look at substitutions and really be able to break down the minutia. So with that being said, as Penn State wins this face-off back into their defensive end, you can start to see their face-off player make his way to the box. As they reverse field and get the ball up and out, the defensive midfielder who is currently in possession of the ball is able to move the ball along to an offensive midfielder, sprint to the midfield line, which releases a second offensive midfielder, and then Penn State, following this next sub, will have their full complement of players on. This next clip is the University of Delaware in white versus Towson University in black. As Delaware wins the face-off out the front, we'll pause it here. You can see in the top left corner Delaware's box-side defensemen as well as Towson's box-side attackmen will start to make their way to the box to get their respective subs on the field. This next clip, we have Colby College in gray versus Middlebury College in navy. Colby is able to pick up a ground ball with their LSM off face-off here. One of the facets that we do talk about as well, and I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on, is the idea in the clearing game or carrying the ball in general. We certainly want to preach run by one, roll away from two, and we'll see exactly why here in a second. So following the opening faceoff, Colby turns the ball over. So now, as a substitution coach, you have to understand that you have almost your entire defensive complement on, with the exception of your faceoff guy, so you need to be conscious of subbing him off the field when the opportunity presents itself. This next clip from the same game, Colby College is able to win the ball out the front and get it into the stick of our attackman. As he moves the ball along, this is certainly something for us, and we'll talk a little bit about in the clear or just establishing possession initially. While the ball is in the stick of an attackman, we certainly need to be outlets for the ball carrier so that he cannot be doubled or create a disadvantageous opportunity for us offensively. Now, as we see, that defensive midfielder is able to sprint over the midfield line, which frees up an offensive midfielder, and then the LSM will sub, so Colby has their full offensive complement. This third and final clip from this game, Colby wins the faceoff backwards into their defensive end. They work through their progressions. And again, following a faceoff win, you need to be conscious of who you're getting on the field, who still needs to sub. And again, just another point of emphasis, as we see here, number 7, the defensive midfielder for Colby, as well as the attackmen, do a great job of playing off of each other, V-cutting to get open to space. And as this midfielder carries, he does a great job of getting below the restraining line. So in a worst case scenario, now we can call a timeout as opposed to him being above the box and rolling back. Is definitely something that can be overwhelming at first, but again, it's necessary to set that precedent and have those clear-cut expectations for players. Something, again, that I think kind of gets lost in the minutia and goes by the wayside is just simply defining what a clear looks like. A successful clear in our program here at Thomas looks like a possession, and with possession being 9/10 of the law, the clear is not going to be complete until the ball is in the stick of an attackman, ideally below the restraining box on the opposite side of the field. When we talk about clearing, it's essential that we understand the objective is to clear the ball first and then sub. I've certainly been in a situation where there's a lot going on, and I got so caught up in being efficient, wanting to give our offense as much of the shot clock to work with as humanly possible, that have actually mistakenly called defensive midfielders off the field before we truly had possession safely established. In instances like these, when we substitute too early, it allows the player who is covering our player who is now subbing the opportunity to double the ball or apply pressure, which then creates a disadvantageous situation for us as a clearing team. This brings me to my next point, being an outlet. We want to clear at a high percentage, and a quintessential part of that is being an outlet for the ball carrier. Once the ball is settled, then we can sub. We'll get into sub games as well as playing in the gray later on, but definitely something to be conscious of. When we go from defense to offense and then sub, we want to be as efficient as possible, and a large component of that is subbing two players simultaneously off the field at any given time. Within the constraints of what your team's built for, whether it's an unsettled situation, number situation, or just flow of the game. For instance, maybe you've just played a lot of defense. You want to play some 6-on-6 or whatever your scheme looks like. Like I alluded to earlier, it is really important that we maximize our efficiency for subbing so that we can send one player to the midfield line while another subs through the box, or potentially both through the midfield line or the box, depending on their respective positions to both landmarks. When we're able to get two subs off the field at a time, the caveat with this is that on the back end, we're also running a close defenseman off the field, just so those numbers works. I've certainly made mistakes in the past where I've been calling for a player who's on the far third of the field to sub through the box, or the exact inverse where I've called a player who's on the near third to sub through the midfield line, which has ultimately made the distance from point A to point B that much further. When you're able to step back and look at it, especially through film review and conversations with your staff, it probably would have made more sense for the players in question to either run across the midfield line in lieu of running all the way across the field, all of which was parallel to the midfield line to then just hop over the midfield line, or sub through the box for the player that was already on the near side third. Hopefully you're able to learn some lessons from my mistakes. As Otto von Bismarck famously said, only a fool learns from his own mistakes. The wise man learns from the mistakes of others. These next clips will all have a clearing emphasis. So as this first clip starts, MIT in black, Colby in white, starts with a fantastic save, and as we work through our progressions, our first look is always up. As this defenseman matriculates the ball up the field and finds a defensive midfielder, we do a good job of moving the ball along to an attackman. We can see our long stick midi crash the crease and gas is cut. As this ball is in the stick of an attackman who does have the ball on the opposite side or opposite restraining box side of the field, we do commit a cardinal error here as he carries the ball up the field and then throws it back ball side. And you can see this allows MIT to generate some pressure and potentially cause a turnover. This next clip features Colby College in gray and Middlebury College in navy. Again, when we talk about clearing, following a quick turnover and an over and back, in this situation, Colby is able to sub their full defensive complement, allowing three offensive midfielders to step onto the field for an easy clear. The second clip from Colby and Middlebury will start with Colby playing catch with the goalie. And as Middlebury looks to clear this ball, again, your first look is always up. They're able to successfully clear the ball and get it into the stick of an attackman. And again, when we talk about the ping pong nature of lacrosse, as Middlebury has possession, they quickly turn the ball over. Again, this is a situation where Colby is able to sub quickly and get some of their offensive complement on the field to clear. And then in just a moment here, we won't be able to see the clip itself, but we can tell by our body language here that Colby has just turned the ball over. So again, as the box coach, it is really important that you understand that with a mixed bag of personnel out there, that we need to focus on not only getting our offensive midfielders off the field, but then subbing appropriately and making sure that we step a close defenseman back on and that we have another defensive midfielder ready or potentially an LSM, depending on your clear. And then last but not least, a nice caveat to the clearing game, and you begin to see number 10 make his way to the midfield line, where we'll have a defensive midfielder in the box. As soon as number 10 is over to step over the midfield line, that will release this defensive midfielder so that Colby has their full defensive complement on the field and they're not worried about giving up opportunities for Middlebury to play with the sub game or have an offensive midfielder stuck on defense for Colby. These last two clips come to us from our past alumni game this fall. The first clip will focus on number two. Again, when we talk about subbing with where we are in the field and respective to those landmarks, the box and the midfield line, number two is on the far or the near side, third, closest to the substitution box. So he elects to sub through the box. This is an efficient sub. For this next clip, number two is already within 5 yards of the midfield line and elects to sub through the box instead of just stepping over the midfield line, which when we break this down in film and talk about efficiency, the quicker that he's able to get over the midfield line, the quicker that will free up a sub for us to get our full offensive complement on the field. Controlled chaos in the form of failed clears. As the box coach, we need to be exceedingly conscious of personnel and who we already have on the field at any given time. A question to ask yourself, do you already have an LSM on? Certainly not my best moment, but there have been instances in my career, thankfully not that regularly and sparingly on a nationally televised broadcast, where I've made the mistake of watching the game, getting caught up in the moment, and subbing an additional LSM on the field when we already had a long stick midfielder on. When we talk about our order of operations, when we turn the ball over in a clear, we need to get our big sticks on the field first, so ideally our close defenseman and our LSM. If we're mid-substitution, say we've subbed a close defenseman as well as an LSM off the field, and we've had two offensive midfielders step on and replace them to clear the ball, we need to get that close defenseman on first, and then a long stick midfielder. Again, just being conscious of the game and understanding who's already on the field. Another one of the questions I often find myself asking is that if we already have an LSM on and we have two offensive midfielders stuck on defense, if we can only sub one offensive midfielder off the field, who are we more comfortable with leaving on the field? Just to throw a hypothetical situation out there, in this instance, we have two offensive midfielders stuck following a change of possession. They did what they were coached to do, which is to get in the hole and not allow anyone behind them. So after we take stock of the situation, who are we more comfortable with leaving out there? If we've got somebody that's potentially a hook, like a fourth attackman, that we ran out, and we're probably going to want to get him off the field. With that comes the lacrosse IQ piece of not getting yourself stuck. Something that we can talk about and then wrap out with our defensive unit is being conscious of who we're guarding and having them ask the question, is this guy going to sub? Then being able to talk to those stuck offensive midfielders so that they might be able to hitch a ride. Again, when we talk about failed clears and the resulting turnovers and subbing, the order of operations is the same. We always want to sub our big sticks first. A lot of times what will happen when we clear the ball, again, depending on how you clear the ball, you may run a close defenseman off, and then all of a sudden that overpass goes awry, out of bounds, and then again, we're having to work through those order of operations. We have our third close defenseman off the field. We have our long stick midfielder off the field. We want to get our close defenseman on first, ideally, followed by our long stick midfielder. This can be further complicated when turnovers happen in transition and you have a hodgepodge of offensive and defensive personnel on the field. While I know the order of operations seems very sophomoric in principle, as you go through the course of the game, the ebbs and flows, emotions are high. It's an up-tempo game. You need to be able to revert to your muscle memory and preparation, affording yourself the ability to stay grounded and to put yourself in a position to be successful. By having your order of operations laid out, you'll be in a much better position when things do go awry, because it's not if, it's when. The first clip that we'll look at features Colby College in gray and Middlebury College in navy. At this point in Colby's clear, they have run one close defenseman off the field, with the entirety of the clearing team being made up of defensive personnel outside of that lone offensive midfielder. So as this clip runs, we'll see the resulting turnover. So we can see here right at the midfield line, the offensive midfielder who came on to clear is able to sprint off the field, which then releases the third close defenseman for Colby. And as this clip runs, and when you put yourself in the shoes of the individual running the box, in this particular situation, you have your full defensive complement on, so we're not worried about subbing on the back end, and then we're able to get into whatever set that we want to play against this. This next clip features Colby College in white versus MIT in black. MIT will turn the ball over here, and especially in the era of the shot clock and quick restarts, from a defensive perspective, we want to be focused on getting in, defending inside out, so covering the biggest threat who is in the closest proximity to the cage. And then conversely, on the offensive end, we certainly want to win the whistle, show the official that we have the ball. And then from a subbing perspective, again, with those failed clears, we want to make sure that we're getting the appropriate personnel on from a defensive perspective. And then offensively, we want to make sure that we're able to get whatever defensive subs that we may have already substituted on the field off to have our full defensive complement. This next clip is from the Final Four this past year. We have Denver in what I'm liberally going to call scarlet, and Notre Dame in white. So Denver has their full offensive complement on to clear the ball, and with this turnover, and we'll see this Final Four effort here, which is fantastic. From the perspective of a failed clear, Denver is able to match feet and sub their first offensive midfielder off with Notre Dame's defensive midfielder. This second offensive midfielder is able to hitch a ride, which then in turn releases the close defenseman and LSM respectively. And then again, able to match feet and sub accordingly, which will free up that last defensive midfielder. This last clip from Colby, again in white versus MIT in dark. When we talk about failed clears, we certainly want to have the mindset of having our offensive midfielders, or in a more positionless system, the three offensive players that are highest in the formation getting in and cutting the break. Colby does a great job of this. And then, especially when we talk about defending inside out, and we'll see here in a second, the midfielders have done a great job of getting in, cutting that initial break, but then MIT is able to generate some transition opportunities as they back cut those subbing midfielders. And then again, when we talk about defending inside out, this is a situation here where we certainly want our close defensemen, ideally our entire team, communicating to our midfielders that we don't want to slide upfield. And when we talk about defending inside out, the way I rationalize this, and obviously just from my perspective, we would rather give up a shot from what is arguably the top of the box versus a dunk inside. And we'll see as Notre Dame plays this creates some offense for Denver. Flip the script and we talk about riding. Again, depending on your non-negotiables, something that we teach in our program is that we want to cut the break, meaning we want our offensive midfielders to get in the hole first and then worry about substitution on the back end. After the initial break, once the ball has matriculated over the midfield line, we want our trapped offensive personnel to follow that defensive player that they're matched up with off the field, effectively hitching a ride. Within this idea, we want to have our players who are subbing match feet, something for our offensive midfielders as well as face-off guys and just anybody that may be in that situation. I think it's really important to teach them the idea that we never want to get in front of the player that we're hitching a ride with. If we don't stay in that hip pocket and get physically ahead of our matchup, we can get back cut or have the string pulled on us. We always want to teach them to stay in that hip pocket, be cross-check ready, and then make sure we're in a situation where it's close to matching feet as we can without getting ahead of that defensive player or whoever we may be subbing with. I alluded to earlier, but just wanted to flesh out some more, is just the lacrosse IQ piece. And within that, being able to take stock and see who we're covering and are they going to sub. We want to communicate switches off ball. In these instances that I've laid out post clear, when the ball is over the midfield line, maybe we have a close defenseman that's matched up with a face-off guy, and we've got a face-off guy that's matched up with an attackman. Do we trust our guys enough? Have we emphasized it enough where they're going to understand that this is not an ideal matchup for us? The close defenseman's matchup is going to sub as he's matched up with the face-off guy, whereas the face-off guy is matched up with an attackman who is not going to sub. Can we communicate that switch off ball? While there's only so many hours in the day, the more that you can put your players in positions where they're going to be able to practice these situations as close to game speed and game-like scenarios as possible, these things will kind of develop naturally. Drill work that's predicated on constraint-based learning, even instances like a 6v6 scramble, to calling an offensive player to sub to emulate those situations is exceedingly beneficial. I'd be remiss if I didn't touch on the notion that while having offensive personnel trapped on defense is not ideal, I would rationalize that it's still better than giving up a break. Having your full complement of defensive personnel on the field really starts to lose its novelty if your offensive midfielders are just bailing during the ride and giving up number situations just to sprint to the box. Certainly, an adage that we utilize within our program a lot is just that notion of under five, hitch a ride, too far away, stay and play. I think this is a really simple way to break it down for our guys when we talk about after that initial clear, the ball has been settled, when is an appropriate time to sub. So, as I alluded to, if your matchup is under 5 yards away, you can certainly hitch a ride. There will be instances where, maybe we hedge to help play off ball defense, or we simply just lost our man in the shuffle. In those instances where we're too far away, that's a situation where we've got to buckle down, we've got to stay and play good defense for the duration of the shot clock or that defensive possession. Another thing that I did just briefly want to touch on when we talk about expanding our defensive repertoire, especially in situations where, as the riding team, maybe we've gotten two of our three subs, our offensive midfielders, off the field. Is that a situation where we can potentially zone it up? Are we capable of playing zone with one offensive midfielder on the field? And we'll see a clip of that here in just a moment. So these next series of clips will focus on riding. We have Duke and White versus Penn State and Navy. So this is a fantastic save. Again, first look is up. And then for Penn State, we will see they elect to drop into their ride. We can see a midfielder making his way to the box to free up an LSM, while these other two offensive midfielders drop into their thirds. And then as Duke is able to get the ball over the midfield line, we'll see that Penn State is able to match feet. This next situation here, again, Penn State and Navy, following a turnover, they will have a midfielder make his way directly to the box, while these other two midfielders will drop into their thirds. This initial midfielder who subs frees up the LSM. And as Penn State is able to apply pressure, they're not giving up transition on the back end. And while they may not have their full defensive complement on the field in the form of defensive midfielders, their offensive midfielders do a great job of getting in and, again, taking away any transition that Duke may be able to muster. This next clip from Denver and Notre Dame. This again features a situation where Notre Dame elects to sub one offensive midfielder, the closest offensive midfielder to the box, which will free up an LSM, while they have for Notre Dame, two offensive midfielders get in and cut the break. And in a situation like this, again, we talk about defending inside out, and certainly the lesser of two evils, a step down from the top of the box versus a top-down feed inside. This next clip, again, from Notre Dame and Denver. And we'll see, again, when it pertains to riding, Notre Dame does apply some pressure with their attackmen. They're able to force this overpass. And in a situation like this, again, when we talk about, as the box coach, being able to clearly communicate our expectations, number 8 here has a little bit of a false step and just a quick hesitation, which on the back end, Notre Dame does have another offensive midfielder in the hole. However, this momentary lapse or this indecision creates a situation where, especially with a slick team like Denver, they're able to generate a scoring opportunity. This next clip coming from Colby College and White versus MIT in dark. A turnover at the top of the box is always instant offense. So as this goes, and we saw this clip earlier, Colby does a great job of having the first 3 offensive players who are at the top of the formation get in. And in this particular instance, they actually have one attackman and 2 offensive midfielders getting in and cutting the break. And then again, when we talk about substitution, we have these two offensive midfielders looking to hitch a ride with the MIT long stick midfielder. And then again, just a miscommunication. And we can see the MIT LSM was able to pull the string here. And again, when we talk about defending inside out, they're not able to connect. And I know this is a subbing video, but certainly something that is, and for lack of a more nuanced metaphor, the juice is just not worth the squeeze here. We never want to flip or throw the ball or roll the ball directly to our goaltender just for the myriad of horrible, horrible things that can happen. But with that being said, Colby's able to get the ball up and out. And then when you talk about running on a runner, you're able to generate some transition. And then in that same breath for MIT, they do a great job of getting in with their defensive personnel and again, maybe one or two offensive midfielders and making sure that they don't give up numbers on the back end. These next couple clips will pertain to communicating off-ball switches. So as we have Denver, we'll pick up the ball following a face-off violation. We'll see here in just a moment. Denver elects to have this defensive midfielder sub, and we can already see Notre Dame does a great job of communicating off ball, telling their face-off man to match feet and substitute with the defensive midfielder. So this does a few things for them. They don't have a defensive mid or a face-off player stuck on the defensive end. They also don't have to worry about sub games as they're able to get their face-off guy off the field. And then they have their full defensive complement on the field. This next clip, again, from Denver versus Notre Dame. Again, we can see a situation where as this goes, the Notre Dame faceoff man is on the field again, and we can see that his teammates do a great job of communicating to him as well as the box coach to instruct him to follow this subbing midfielder. So again, he's not caught on defense, and they also don't have to worry about the myriad of sub games that are associated with that. And then last but not least here, when we talk about certainly the pros and cons of having offensive midfielders trapped on defense, Colby does a great job here where my cursor is. Number 12 gets in. He does exactly what he's coached to do. He cuts the break. He's not running off the field before there's an established possession. MIT, again, is obviously able to have that hand signal and alert the rest of the team that he has a matchup advantage, that he wants to get this offensive midfielder stuck. So something that Colby elects to do is just drop into a zone, and we can see number 12 will begin to make his way to the inside of the zone. And again, a million different ways to play this or to teach this. But again, one of those situations where we can look at all the inherent weaknesses of having an offensive midfielder trapped on the field, and we can turn that into a positive through being able to scheme that up. Restarts are something that I've become a lot more well-versed in as my coaching career has gone on. One of the big points of emphasis for me as it pertains to restarts is understanding whether it's a slow or a fast whistle situation. When we talk about a fast whistle situation, that might be a sideline restart or a catch and a save. We want to make sure that our box side midfielder or closest offensive player to the box is getting off the field so that we're able to get our first defensive personnel on, ideally our long stick midfielder, when we talk about our order of operations. As it pertains to slow whistle situations, where maybe the ball is restarted off an end line or that far sideline, or at certain points, in my experience, maybe the game day operations staff is trying to replenish end line balls. In these slow whistle situations, we can afford to sub 2 or 3 players off the field. If we can jailbreak and sub our whole offensive midfield in a timely manner, we will elect to do that, with the understanding that we're not giving up any numbers by doing so. Once our box side attackman is subbed off, allowing our defensive midfielder to replace him as a riding attackman, the opposite box side midfielder can then step over the midfield line into our offensive end. Conversely, our defensive midfielder, who is currently serving as a riding attackman, can then drop over the midfield line. So effectively, the offensive midfielder who was riding now becomes an attackman, and the defensive midfielder who stepped on in that riding attack position now matriculates over the midfield line and is able to play their natural position. When the opposing team does manage to get the ball up and out, another system that we've had a lot of success with is where an offensive midfielder is stuck on defense. Following a shot off the end line, we can elect to zone it up and have that offensive player sprint to the midfield line, creating a momentary 6v5. If this isn't possible, we can also elect to zone it up with all 6 players, again, placing our offensive player directly in the crease with their back to the end line, playing a 5-man rotation behind them. Both of these options require everyone being on the same page, but just wanted to put that out there as some other ways to think about potentially mitigating the impact of defensive liabilities in big air quotes that we can have. This train of thought has worked for us in simplifying our understanding that just because we might have one offensive player who's stuck on the defensive end, instead of teaching him all of the nuances with defense as well as the other offensive personnel, all we have to do is teach them this one position to play in this one particular instance. So just to further kind of flesh out that idea, that flip-flop situation with subbing a defensive midfielder onto our offensive end and replacing the far side third offensive midfielder. So as we work left to right with figure number 1, this is a situation where we do have our full offensive complement following a shot out of bounds or a turnover on the end line, whatever it may be. What we want to have is our closest 2 offensive midfielders make their way to the box, as well as our closest attackman, with the caveat being that our lone offensive midfielder who is still on the field will drop over the midfield line and occupy that far third riding spot. As we work down to figure 3, we can see at this point we've subbed our LSM, our first defensive midfielder, as well as our second defensive midfielder on as a riding attackman. What this allows us to do, and we can see in figure 3 into figure 4, the offensive midfielder who's occupying the far third is able to step over into our offensive end, becoming an attackman, which frees up our second defensive midfielder step over the midfield line. And then we have our full defensive complement on. And then as the individual who's running the box, all we have to worry about is subbing this midfielder off. So again, it mitigates a lot of those sub games that other teams may try to play and allows you to get your defensive complement on in a timely fashion. As coaches, we want to be and need to be exceedingly proactive, not reactive. With that being said, any whistle or stoppage of play, and I know I mentioned this earlier, but we always want to assume that the call is going against us and to think defensive so that we can get the appropriate personnel on. Something that I think younger coaches struggle with at times is in dead ball situations, we don't want to wait, whether it's an inadvertent whistle, stoppage of play, whatever it may be, just sub our offensive personnel off the field. Use this time as an opportunity to get the appropriate personnel on the field and hopefully our full defensive complement. When we talk about thinking defensive, we'll see these next couple clips illustrate this. Notre Dame in white, Denver in dark. So in this situation, loose ball push, whatever the call may be, instead of going palms up, Notre Dame does a great job of getting to the box in a timely fashion and subbing their offensive personnel. As Denver restarts this ball, and the camera will pan up here in just a second, we can see that they have their full defensive complement on the field. So this alleviates a lot of subbing on the back end, as well as not giving up numbers in transition, which is huge. And then additionally, not having to worry about any sub games or potential mismatches with having offensive personnel stuck on the field. Same game here. As the ball gets on the ground, we can see that Denver is able to create pressure with their attackmen while their midfielders make their way to the box. In this situation, Denver was able to get 2 out of their 3 offensive midfielders off of the field. And again, with their attackmen applying pressure, as Notre Dame is able to move this ball up, Denver has most of their defensive complement on the field. And then we can see that this lone midfielder will then sprint to the midfield line, releasing that defensive midfielder. So last clip from Denver versus Notre Dame. Again, whistle situation. Instead of going palms up and having conversations with the officials, we can see that Notre Dame does a great job of just dropping, especially with more so the idea of positionless lacrosse. It's not necessarily having to get all three of our midfielders off, but rather the midfield or the players that are the three highest players in the offensive formation. So as we can see here, you can see the communication off ball. Notre Dame's able to encourage that overpass. And then as Denver does move the ball up the field, we can see kind of that subbing action on the back end with number 10 stepping over, freeing up a defensive midfielder. And then all Notre Dame has to do is sub this last offensive midfielder off. And we can see that communication off ball as well. When we talk about substituting in man up and man down situations, it starts to get really weird. I think that you just have to embrace the weirdness. So, in man up situations, this is an opportunity to play exceedingly aggressive. For us, as it pertains to the substitution game, there's a lot of potential to hop right into a 10-man ride and put pressure on that clearing team. Man down situations, and again, a lot of times this is just going to depend on your school of thought, whether to start the possession or at a predetermined time, you'll step a short stick defensive midfielder on our offensive end to release the penalty. That can be something with, again, depending on how you run your man down clear, you could almost have like an A over situation where potentially your LSM is releasing him, and that's a pretty quick up and out, and that allows you to mitigate the headaches when you're clearing with one less person. All of this, again, is largely going to depend on your clear with what that's going to look like. Additionally, with failed man down clears, just being cognizant of what's happening, there may be a situation where after a save or a clearing opportunity, we run our substitution pattern, get our two offensive midfielders on the field, and there's still time in the penalty, and we turn the ball over. Those offensive midfielders, again, with their non-negotiables, they get in the hole, they cut the break, and instead of stepping a defensive midfielder on to replace an attackman, we can put our LSM on attack to exchange with one of our offensive midfielders as he hitches a ride. That way, you've got your four big sticks on the field. He can step over, and then a defensive midfielder can replace him to release the penalty when time expires. Another oddly specific situation that may occur while you're still man down, but do not have a settled possession, a 6-on-5 in favor of the opponent. You really need to be cognizant about having your LSM close to you during the entire possession. The potential for a double team or for the ball to get placed on the ground, your LSM has to be the first guy to sub on just so you have your full complement of big six out there. Last but not least, and hopefully I've reinforced this point, but we want to be really conscious of penalty time. Who's releasing it and who still needs to sub, whether that's an attackman, long stick midfielder, close defenseman. All of that stuff really goes into being effective in the substitution game and within those nuanced specialty situations. These next clips will all pertain to substituting in man up and man down situations. In this initial clip, we have Colby College in gray playing against Middlebury in navy. Colby is currently man up in this situation. They have a turnover. You can see that they're able to apply a copious amount of pressure to the ball carrier, and this is a fantastic individual effort with this defenseman. But again, with Colby being in a man up situation, as this ball moves, they're able to play aggressive, generate some pressure with this close defenseman, able to pick the ball up off the ground, move it, and especially in a situation where it's a 7-2 rock fight, you have to take transition where you can get it. This next situation, we have Denver in dark versus Notre Dame in white. So in those situations that we laid out before, where there is a turnover when we're clearing it from a man down perspective, this would be a situation where we would have three big sticks on the field and two short stick clearing midfielders. So this particular clip will end up in a goal in Notre Dame's favor, but just again, more that thought experiment of understanding you have two potentially offensive midfielders on the defensive end. So on the back end, when we step an attackman off, we want to step an LSM on our offensive end so that when one of these midfielders hitches a ride with Notre Dame's defensive personnel, we're able to get our LSM on, have our full complement of big sticks. Then we can step a defensive midfielder on to release the penalty when time does actually expire on that penalty. This next clip, again, we've got Colby College in white versus Middlebury in dark. So Colby is clearing, so they're in a man down situation here. And for this particular clear, Colby will elect to have their long stick midfielder sprint over the midfield line, which will release the defensive midfielder who's currently on the offensive end as an attackman. Again, there's a million different ways to clear, but just wanted to flesh that out. So fantastic job rolling away from two, maintaining possession, working through our clearing progressions. And we can see here in just a moment, as that LSM makes his way over the midfield line, this releases a defensive midfielder who's able to run through the ball and then certainly do what he's paid to do and be an athlete and clear the ball here. So we can see as number 4 has the ball, he makes his way over the midfield line, runs to green grass, moves on to 16. Then 16 is able to get that ball into the stick of an attackman opposite box below the restraining line. So in this instance, if worst case scenario, Colby would be able to call a timeout in this situation. We can see number 4 is being directed to the substitution box to get an offensive midfielder on. 16 does a great job of being an outlet. And then once he's called, he's able to sub as well, which then number 34 and number 29 will step on for Colby. So Colby has their full offensive complement, obviously still being man down until that penalty is released. Penalties and how to avoid them. It goes without saying, but again, it's not what you teach, it's what you emphasize. Your players need to sub through the substitution box and not on the sideline. When we talk about delayed subs and the nuances with that, it is largely up to the referee's discretion, but we need to have 4 back in the defensive end when subbing, so we have to be conscious of that. Situations that can come up may include having your box side close defenseman hanging out in the substitution box while you've got an offensive midfielder waiting to sub and he's having a conversation with the offensive coordinator. We need to have that offensive midfielder step on sides on our defensive end so that we don't have a delayed sub. Offsides and too many men, I think, is a really subtle one, but it's really important to be conscious of. Understanding that in a situation where we go offsides, for instance, we're riding and a midfielder steps offsides, that midfielder that stepped off needs to stay in play. If we sub the player who went offsides initially off the field and a new player comes on, we've created a situation where not only is that offside still being penalized, but now we have too many men, so that can compound and result in 2 separate time serving fouls, which in turn can lead to a really awkward conversation in the film room the next day. This is a situation that we want to avoid to the best of our ability. And again, I think knowledge is power and really something for all of us to be cognizant of. Your role as the box coach is to put your team in a position where we're not being a detriment to our team, even in an odd situation where there's a flag down, ensuring that we're subbing appropriately. So this next figure just diagrams a delayed sub and a potential situation and where this might occur. So again, as we move left to right, as we start with our figure number 1, we can see that we have almost our entire complement of offensive players on, with our lone defensive midfielder needing to sub. Our offensive midfielder M3 has stepped onto the field. So as that defensive midfielder makes his way over the midfield line, that then releases our offensive player. So we have our full 6 on the offensive end. But in this situation, D3, who was our lone close defenseman that came off to substitute, is not yet back on the field of play. So he needs to reestablish himself on the field. And again, we need to make sure that we have 4 back in our defensive end with our goalie and our 3 close defensemen. So one of those situations where it can be tic-tac, but again, just something that you don't want to get caught up in a foul like this, which is completely avoidable. So again, just being present, being where your feet are, and being conscious of the personnel that you have on the field to avoid silly penalties like this. So these next clips will all deal with penalties in the substitution game and how to avoid them. So for these clips, we have University of Delaware in white versus Towson in dark. So as Delaware rides the ball back, initially they are fine. They have their full complement of 6 defensive players. And then as we can see, they will have a 4th midfielder step over. So now they have 7 on the defensive end. So we have a flag down for offsides. As this goes through the direction of his box coach, number 20 follows the Towson long stick off the field. And then again, what further complicates this situation is number 20 has already gone off sides. Since he is now actively subbing and Delaware steps a new player on the field, not only do they still have that initial flag down for offsides, but now they have too many men with the addition of their long stick midfielder. This next clip has Thomas College in white versus the University of Maine in dark. So as Thomas gains possession here, and certainly the fall for everybody, there's a little bit of a miscue. For the longest time, we only had 5 players on offense, and we can see on the back end, we're able to step an offensive midfielder on our defensive end. That clear and concise communication piece again, we need to tell our offensive midfielder that's okay for him to step over. And again, just avoiding a situation where we have an offensive midfielder stepping on through the box, as well as an offensive midfielder stepping over the midfield line, which would be too many men. So we figure that out. We're able to have an offensive midfielder step over. But at this point, this would be a delayed sub because we only have 3 back in the defensive end. And we can see this goes on for a bit. And again, just as the box coach, we want to be able to be responsible for the situation. And we can see we have a little bit of an error with a midfielder stepping on, and then eventually we'll have a close defenseman step on. So it's all well and good. So when we talk about special situations, I do think with short time situations, being able to create situations in practice for your players, as well as your coaching staff, where they need to be conscious of clock and score. Within our scheme, do we want to stay and play, or do we want to substitute? For instance, if there's 30 seconds left in a half, if we win the faceoff clean, we're able to get the ball to our attackman. Do we want to have a settled possession where we get our full offensive complement on the field, or do we want to play the numbers game and play in the gray a bit? Within that, there's a ton of different possibilities that you can do depending on your set, the flow of the game, as well as your personnel. You can have your rope unit get involved in some pass down pick downs, potentially some up picks, then slipping those picks. And again, a lot of that is time and personnel dependent. So further expanding on sub games, there are special situations, maybe, when we win a face-off out the front or we sub O to D and we've got an offensive midfielder stuck that we really want to get involved in the pick game. Or I think something that can be even more beneficial as opposed to dodging the offensive player who is trapped, putting them in a position where instead of being the primary on-ball defenseman, we instead put them in a situation where they've got to make slide decisions, or particularly in the pick game, this forces them to make decisions as opposed to just playing on-ball defense. The exact inverse, though, is that we want to be prepared in these situations where if that does happen to us, what our strategy is going to be and how we will defend those situations. In cases where teams elect to sub later on and play 5v5, wherein a player is isolated, whether it's near the box side or opposite box side, when this occurs on the box side, we can potentially talk to our player who is trapped. We can elect to have them stay with their matchup or match feet, or conversely, we can call the bluff of the other team if they want to play the numbers game with their face-off guy or defensive midfielder, whoever it may be. If the opposing team is playing 5v5 with a player opposite box side, we can even teach our players where they can kind of help in and crowd defensively, putting that player who is trapped in that situation where he can still match feet with his matchup if that matchup elects to sub, but also we're not giving up sweeps while simultaneously not getting stuck and giving up numbers trying to match feet. With that being said, it is really important for both sides of the ball to be able to teach pick play with non-offensive personnel. We've been really successful with this and had a lot of opportunities to incorporate this into our practices through constraint-based learning. We teach every player on our team how to set a pick properly so that they're not just running in a straight line, keeping in mind that no pick is better than a moving pick. They understand that they've got to get in to get out, and they're opening up to the ball carrier and not turning their back to the ball so that we can throw back. Pulling the string or back cutting a player goes 2 ways. There's a time and place for that. I've definitely had instances where I've had to joystick or video game our players. We've literally told players what to do, when to do it. And I think if you're in a situation where you're able to avoid that and allow those players to understand, yeah, this is a situation where the guy who was guarding me is 12 yards behind me. I don't need to pull the string. I can sprint off the field and we'll have a numbers advantage. Or conversely, this guy's not really paying attention. This might be a position where I can back cut him, pull the string, and then we'll be in a good spot. With that being said, under 5, hitch a ride. Too far away, stay and play. Buckle down, play good defense for that possession or the duration of the shot clock. So all of these next clips will just detail those specialty situations The first three clips will detail all short time situations. So Mercyhurst in white versus Walsh in dark. With 6 seconds, there's really not a lot of deliberation with this. Mercyhurst sends the ball down the field, and good if it goes. This next situation with Cornell in white, Syracuse in dark. Syracuse is in a situation here where, again, there's not a ton of deliberation with what to do. They need to generate a scoring opportunity, and they do exactly that. This third clip here is different than the first two in the fact that Duke in white, Penn State in navy. Duke wins the faceoff. There's 30 seconds left in the half. So this is where that philosophical piece comes into play of, do we want to play with our rope unit? Are we comfortable with that personnel, or do we want to elect to get our full offensive complement? Duke does exactly that. As they move the ball along, we'll see them begin to sub. So again, they can have their first midfield line or whoever it may be out there. And then within the sub game, Penn State does a great job recognizing that Duke doesn't have all of their personnel on yet. They're able to double the ball, and just two sides to the same coin. They're able to generate a turnover here. And then again, with a little shy of 5 seconds on the clock, not a ton of deliberation. As long as this ball is out of this defenseman's stick before the clock hits 0, good if it goes. This situation here with Denver, Denver Notre Dame, when we talk about these sub games, we can see that Denver has an offensive midfielder stuck with Notre Dame's defensive midfielder. Notre Dame will elect to have this defensive midfielder get involved with the pick. We can also see their other offensive midfielder matching feet and getting off the field. So as this starts to develop, Notre Dame will move this ball along, and kind of like I alluded to before, instead of just dodging this offensive midfielder, situations where he has to navigate this pick, talk the on-ball defender through, certainly create some matchup nightmares on the defensive end. And then with that, Notre Dame is able to, again, play these further sub games where it's a little stop and go, keep Denver on their heels as far as what's happening as far as substitution. This next clip here is just a classic pass down, pick down. So for us at Thomas, this is definitely a situation where we want to teach all of our close defensemen, our face-off guys, our defensive midfielders, our long stick middies, even our goalies, a situation where they can set a proper pick. So it's not a situation where we have an offensive possession and then we needlessly turn the ball over because we did something silly like setting a moving pick. So as you can see, Rutgers in white versus LIU in Carolina blue here, they're able to set this pass down, pick down, and allow this attackman to get over the top to generate a high scoring opportunity. This next situation, or this next clip, I should say, Colby College in gray, Middlebury in navy. Middlebury is able to clear the ball. And then Colby has two offensive midfielders, number 29 and number 10 on the defensive end. They do what they need to do, get in, cut the break as far as an initial push and transition is concerned. And then they're able to match feet and sub with their respective matchup. So we can see number 10 and number 29 are making their way. In number 29's case, his matchup pulls the string, and then we'll get to see a little bit of that 5-on-5 situation here. This is certainly an instance where we can see our coaching staff directing number 29. Colby, in this instance, they just elected to call the bluff, and Middlebury will have a momentary 6-on-5 advantage. But again, it's exactly like I alluded to, just calling that bluff and seeing if that defensive midfielder can sting it or get involved in this momentary transition situation. This next clip here, again, Duke in white, Penn State in navy. Duke is able to win the faceoff, and as we can see, Penn State is matching feet with the Duke faceoff man. And this is a situation, again, just with a little bit of trickery. The Duke faceoff man is able to pull the string. Great job playing with their head up, and then he's able to hammer one home here. This next clip with Colby in white versus MIT in dark, we can see that Colby's playing 5v5 with a defensive midfielder here. One of the nuances with this, when you do elect to play a situation like this, when we talk about the substitution aspect, this player, whoever is the one trapping the offensive midfielder, or whoever it may be on the field, he has to be the first player to substitute. More than likely, just when we talk about the rationale behind that, how the situation occurred, he was probably playing defense. He cleared the ball, he stayed on, he was an outlet, and then was directed to play this 5v5 role. More than likely, he's tired, or at the very least, he doesn't have fresh legs. So, as we can see, when this turnover happens here, he will be the first person to sub, which allows Colby to get their long stick midfielder on. And then again, just that ping pong nature of lacrosse. Ball's on the ground. This long stick midfielder, number 88, who subbed on for number 7, who was playing that 5v5 situation, has fresh legs, and he's able to pick up a goal in transition. This next clip here, again, when we talk about the 5v5 aspect, Colby has elected to play 5v5 with this defensive midfielder here, trapping this offensive midfielder for MIT. In situations like this, it's certainly an instance where we can talk to this offensive midfielder who's trapped and encourage him to crowd defensively here, because he can still match feet with this defensive midfielder, juxtaposed to that situation where, when we talk about that box side, if he helps in too much, this defensive midfielder can just pull the string and instantly make his way to the box. Being on the opposite box side of the field, this does give you a little bit more leverage defensively, because it just becomes a foot race to the midfield line as opposed to just stepping off to the box directly. So this next situation here, again, 5v5 with Colby in white, MIT in dark. Just another situation when we talk about lacrosse IQ, have an errant shot. MIT's bench does a great job of communicating to this midfielder that there's a shot going out of bounds. He can make his way to the substitution box, so they're able to get their full defensive complement on. This next clip, again, Duke and White, Penn State and Navy. As we talk about playing these substitution games currently, Duke has a big stick on the field, whether that's a long stick midfielder or a close defenseman. So they have 6. Penn State has 5 in this instance. So he's able to stay on, get the ball back, and then one more pass to generate a high scoring opportunity, high percentage scoring opportunity. This next clip here, when we talk about those situations where, pulling the string versus just sprinting towards the midfield line, this Penn State defensive midfielder does have a step on this Duke defensive offensive midfielder, so he's able to make his way right to the midfield line, and this creates a bit of a step. So Duke has to respect this defensively, and then Penn State is able to see what they have from an offensive perspective. This next clip again, when we talk about utilizing defensive midfielders in the pick game, this puts Penn State in a precarious situation, because this offensive midfielder now, instead of being the man who's dodged or the primary on-ball defender, now he has to worry about communicating, navigating this pick, and directing the on-ball defender through. And then we can see Duke will begin to play with the numbers game a little bit here and hopefully generate a step. I really appreciate you guys taking a look at this video. Hopefully it was beneficial to you. Again, my name is Lukk. I'm the associate head coach at Thomas College in Waterville, Maine. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, I can be reached directly at the email address below. I'll also post my LinkedIn page in the description. Huge shout out to Firesidelacrosse, Thomas College Men's Lacrosse, and Coach Scott for providing me with this opportunity. Appreciate the time, and roll Terriers.